At this time, I'm going to pass it off to Janine Fear, who will take us through the remainder of the body of the presentation.
Hello everyone, I hope you all are having a good day right now. Today we'll be going over a significant amount of material as they relate to developments of regional impacts or DRIs as found within Chapter 4 of your handbook. Now, unlike our previous webinars, we will be focusing on only the relevant portions of Chapter 4, including existing DRI procedures and requirements as established in Section 380.06 of Florida statutes. Exemptions as they relate to DRIs, opportunities for review and input within the DRI process, and relevant additional information from checklists located at the end of Chapter 4 with other online link aids to help you out. Now, I say only relevant portions of this chapter because changes from Senate Bill 1216 this year, which became effective during the summer, has divided the treatment of developments that would be considered DRIs into two procedures. One for those who are still existing DRIs underneath 380.06, and another for those who are new coming in this year. We're going to go through basically the old version portion first before we go over to new to set up context for what's going on with the DRI program. Now, as an aside, you will notice that there are several statutory references on these slides. I use statutory references as usually numbers don't change when laws change, the words do. It's easier for me and maybe for you all if you have these statutory references as a guide to going through looking at changes in law. Now, what is a DRI? As I mentioned, DRIs are developments of regional impact. And on the slide you see before you, we have the definition from statute, saying that any development which, because of its character, magnitude, or location, would have substantial effect on the health, safety, or welfare of citizens in more than one county. Now you'll notice that there's an asterisk there that says exceptions and conditions may apply, and I'm going to get to that asterisk momentarily. The DRI program, when it was established, provides a process to identify regional impacts stemming from large developments and appropriate provisions to mitigate for those impacts. Now, what qualifies as a DRI? Section 380.06 contains several general thresholds in regards to residential and commercial development that define what type of development would be considered a DRI. In addition, in regards, I was talking about residential thresholds. Residential thresholds for DRIs are based on population estimates from the Bureau of Economic and Business Research, or BEBR, and are available on Department of Economic Opportunities, or DEO's website. The last change for these population estimates have occurred in April of last year, and so the new thresholds for residential development is as effective as October 2014. Now on the slide before you, you're going to see an example of a DRI. This is the Foley DRI that is located in Taylor County. Now, as I said, DRIs are identified as meeting certain thresholds in terms of commercial and residential development. But there are several exemptions that do qualify some development not to go through the DRI process. Some of the development exemptions occurs for certain forms of developments, including hotel, motel, solid mineral mining operations, hospitals, marinas, electrical power plants, and the rest that you see on the slide before you. And some of these, such as solid mineral mining operations and attraction and recreation facilities like sport facility complexes, when they have additions to these developments, their additions would also not qualify as being exempt from the DRI process.
Janine, hey, this is Gary.
Yes.
And I think one of the reasons that we point this out, and I'm sorry if I missed that, is they used to be
Yeah.
DRIs just by being a marina, for instance. Like almost any size marina used to be a DRI.
Yeah.
And so this was a big change a few years back because even small uses like these were considered developments of regional impact.
Yes, Gary, that is correct. You've been exemptions such as for certain types of development have been occurring for DRI since the 1990s, and some of these, especially with sport facility complexes, have been pretty recent in the last 1 or 2 years. Now, aside from different types of developments that would be exempted from the DRI process, you have certain locations throughout the state that would also be exempted from the DRI process. What we're going to talk about now is called dense urban land areas, or DULAs. So a DULA municipality, urban service areas of a DULA county, and DULA counties without urban service areas would be exempt from the DRI review process. Dense urban land areas, or DULAs, basically are certain locations that have certain population threshold they have met to be considered such. DEO has on its website a list of the local governments qualifying as DULAs that you can visit, and there's a link on the bottom of the slide that can take you there. DULAs include a municipality that has an average of at least 1,000 people per square mile of land area, with a minimum total population of at least 5,000 people. A DULA county, including all the municipalities located within that county, has an average population of at least 900,000 people and has an average of at least 1,000 people per square mile, similar to that of a municipality. Here is a map illustrating those local governments which would be exempt from the DRI process. Currently, there are 8 counties and more than 200 municipalities that are considered DULAs in the state. Now, to put that into context, there's at least 67 counties within the state of Florida with over 400 municipalities. Now, let's not forget our friends in counties and municipalities that are not considered DULAs. Underneath Section 38006, you can be a faux DULA in the eyes of the DRI program. Those cities and counties that are not DULAs have exemptions as well. And those exemptions usually fall into whether developments in an urban infill area, community redevelopment area, downtown revitalization, an urban service area, or a service boundary. And last but not least, there are other exemptions as well to the DRI program that are not specifically so much location, but they're legislative exemptions. That includes any areas within an urban service boundary. Those are any development within those urban service boundaries would be exempt from the DRI process, as well as any development within a rural land stewardship area that we talked about in our last webinar on Chapter 3. Any development within the detailed specific area plan, which, again, from our talk last time on Chapter 3, is part of a sector plan. Those developments would be exempt from the DRI process. Additional exemptions also are available for those developments that are related to airport and campus master plans. Now, we have identified what would be or not be considered DRI under state law. Now we must discuss how we will deal with DRIs. And I see, do we have a question in the audience by chance?
Yes, we do. Janine? Hey,
Yes.
this is Gary. And Masood asks us a question really didn't have an answer. I just was going to tell him that I was going to wait until you asked. But the question is, if an exempt land use is part of a mixed-use development, and I'm assuming a mixed-use development that is a part of a development of regional impact, how would you recommend handling the situation? I do not know if that is what Masood meant. And
Well, I can look into.
Masood, I have unmuted you. I don't know if you actually have it is what he means. Yes. So you have a development of regional impact. It's got a bunch of uses in it, and it's got an amusement park.
Then that, and I can look into this a bit more for Masood, but in that instance, that amusement park would not be considered part of the development of regional impact. It would not be considered within the thresholds since it's an exempt development, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, what it's saying is that all the other land uses would be what they use to determine whether it's a DRI or not.
Correct.
But when it comes to the study, that would be up to, my assumption would be up to the agencies that are reviewers to discuss how to put those other uses in there to discuss things like the impacts.
Yes.
Rather than just ignore them. Thank you, Masood. I can always depend on you for good questions.
And thank you. While I'm a little pause, is there any other questions before I move forward?
I don't see any more here. So feel free to ask, and we love getting questions from you.
All right. Then I will move on to the next slide. Now, as I was briefly saying, how do you deal with a development that is considered a DRI despite the exemptions and adhering to the thresholds? Well, that's where we get into the impact of Senate Bill 1216 that I was mentioning earlier. Senate Bill 1216 became effective May 14th of this year. With the establishment of Senate Bill 1216, DRIs that have been approved prior to the effective date of that legislation will continue to follow the procedures and requirements of Section 38006. All new proposed development, which would qualify as a DRI pursuant to the thresholds found in Section 38006 that we just went over, would now actually go through the comprehensive plan process underneath the state coordinated review. So what we're going to do today, and before I jump into that, we're going to talk about two separate processes for everyone. One dealing with existing DRIs and one to deal with new developments that would be considered DRIs. Now, before I start talking about the original process, I want to talk about something called sector plans. Now, if you're with us on our Chapter 3 webinar, we had a detailed discussion about sector plans. As we talked during that webinar, we discussed the fact that sector plans were considered an alternative to the DRI program. They are intended for areas that are 15,000 acres or more, and are contain two parts: long-term master plans and detailed specific area plans, or DSAPs. Now, you saw this terminology DSAP previously because those are one of the exemptions underneath the current DRI program. There's two ways in which developments become sector plans. One is a regular way in which the developer creates a sector plan from scratch underneath Section 163.3245 of the Florida statutes. Another way is if a developer or local government has a future land use map amendment that qualifies for the criteria underneath the statute for sector plans, they can convert their future land use amendment into a sector plan. And this can only occur for future land use amendment future land use map amendments that were approved after July 1 of 2011. We have this here as just a note that as we're seeing the DRI program potentially going away, we are probably going to see more and more about sector plans going into the future. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to talk today about the two separate processes that have now been developed from the changes in legislation this year. One of which we're going to talk about first is in regards to dealing with existing DRIs. As I said, existing DRIs will still follow the procedures of Section 380.06. Now, to give some context to what we'll be talking about in regards to existing DRIs, I would like to go over, in general, the DRI process as set forth in Section 380.06. Major areas I would like to talk about is towards the beginning on your slide, towards the left, is the binding letter. The binding letter was something that was optional to help a developer get an understanding of whether or not their development would qualify as a DRI. After a binding letter has been received, they can move forward with their process. The applicant would contact the applicable Regional Planning Council, or RPC, to schedule the pre-application meeting, which would coincide with the transportation methodology meeting. That meeting will help talk about the methodology and all the assumptions that will be used to prepare what is known as the application for development approval. After these meetings are done, agreements must be made on the assumptions and methodology to be used for this application for development approval, or ADA. The ADA is a key documentation necessary to continue along the DRI process. After one or two sufficiency determinations to find the application is complete, or in some cases the applicant doesn't respond to requests for additional information from the sufficiency determinations, the RPC will develop its recommendations conditions report in coordination with reviewing state agencies and submit it to local government, of whom will be issuing the development order for a DRI, also known as a DO. So this is important to understand that DRIs, up until now, were approved as development orders. After the final public meeting for a DRI, the local government will choose whether or not to issue the DO for the DRI. After issuance of that DO within 45 days, the RPC, applicant, or DO can choose to appeal the DO or not. If no one appeals the DO, then you have an approved DRI. Now, during this process, there are several opportunities for FDOT reviewers to make comments and to coordinate to ensure that all potential transportation impacts are addressed and mitigated for the DRI. And these include the DRI determination, which is the binding letter, the pre-application methodology meeting, the ADA review we were just speaking of, sufficiency review, the RPC assessment report, the development order review, or the DO, and reviews of approved DRIs. With the legislative changes that have impacted growth management law this year, the most relevant of these opportunities to reviewers and other parties is the last on this list: reviews of approved DRIs. That is, as we have discussed, new developments that would qualify as DRIs would not be going through this process any longer. So now we only have existing DRIs to worry about in the context of the DRI program. So here is the important section for those of you with existing DRIs. We will now go over the review opportunities for you as mentioned previously. Those review opportunities that exist in regards to existing approved DRIs and areas in which you should focus your review. A major area of activity for existing DRIs is a notice of proposed change, or NOPC. Any change which creates a reasonable likelihood of additional regional impacts or any change not previously reviewed by the applicable Regional Planning Council or RPC must be documented as an NOPC pursuant to Section 380.06, subparen 19. When an applicant has a change, on their website, DEO has a standard form available for those who want to submit their NOPC. Now you may wonder, why go through an NOPC with an approved DRI? Well, there could be a variety of reasons that a developer may want to file an NOPC, which can include changes in market conditions or wanting to take advantage of new laws such as exemptions or revised thresholds. And those changes can include changes in build-out times. They can move out or constrict their build-out times. Changes in the number of single-family units, multifamily, or retirement units. Changes in commercial or industrial square footage. Changes in the number of external vehicle trips generated by development, and many more. And on the slide you see as an example is from the Connerton DRI, in which their proposed changes saw reductions in several residential areas, but increases in their commercial and industrial. Now, FDOT reviewers should review NOPCs to see if the change will cause a substantial deviation from an approved DRI's development order. A substantial deviation is any changes, individual or cumulative, with other changes, which exceed thresholds that are documented underneath Section 380.06, subparen 19. A summary of these thresholds can be found within your handbook on page 155, Exhibit 35. If a change, like I said, individual cumulative, exceeds the thresholds found within Section 380.06, that would trigger a substantial deviation for that NOPC. Now, often when an NOPC is submitted, you'll find a traffic study that's also submitted. That traffic study is usually submitted to rebut the presumption of a substantial deviation. The review of process for traffic studies associated with rebuting the presumption of substantial deviation varies depending on the magnitude and scope of deviation requested. So, for a reviewer, when they're looking at a traffic study, it could be simple as doing a trip generation comparison to see whether or not there's a substantial deviation, or as complex as doing a detailed assessment similar to what you would do with the application of development approval during the DRI review process. Please make sure, though, that when you're reviewing traffic studies, that the studies themselves are using proposed mitigation that's consistent with the development order. In addition, you must also make sure that multimodal considerations are also taken into account. When a reviewer is looking at an NOPC, within the handbook, please look at DRI checklist number 7. That would help you with your review of NOPCs. In addition, Appendix G of the handbook also has examples of NOPCs and determinations of substantial deviation to help you with your review. If the review on NOPC determines that the changes are a substantial deviation from the original development order, then FDOT must provide their comments concerning this to the RPC, typically within 30 days. The DRI will then have to proceed through a DRI review process regarding those changes identified in the NOPC. This will lead to the amendment to the DO that has to be reissued by a local government. Now, what you do not see on this slide is what happens if the NOPC is found not to have substantial deviation. Then the changes do not have to go through DRI review, and the DO is simply amended by through public hearing with the local government. Now, moving back to if an OPC is determined to have substantial deviation and a DO is amended, similar to the original DO, FDOT reviewers must agree on a transportation methodology used with the amendment to the DO. They must also agree with the assessment of proposed changes that are reflected with their comments raised during the review at an NOPC and the conclusions used to support the amended DO. Do we have any questions on this before I move on? Okay.
I do not see any right now.
All right, then I will move on to DRI reporting. This is another review opportunity area in regards to approved DRIs. There are two areas of DRI reporting we're going to talk about today: biannual reports and transportation or traffic monitoring studies. Now, biannual reports are a requirement underneath Section 380.06, Subparent 18 of Florida statutes. And they are submitted in alternating years from the date of the approval of the DO, unless specified otherwise in a DO agreement. Now, some of you may remember there used to be something called annual reports. Annual reports are no longer in statutes. So if a DO agreement requires an annual report, that could be revised to be changed to biannual reports if everyone agrees to that. Now, for biannual reports, the FDOT reviewers should ensure that mobility on the statewide system, including Strategic Intermodal System or SIS, or statewide highway system, is addressed through project implementation. If concerns arise, the FDOT reviewer is instructed to contact the RPC, local government, and the applicant to discuss. This discussion process should be guided by the relationships between FDOT and other local parties. It is the responsibility of the local government to cease issuing building permits for this project until appropriate written approvals are obtained and any mitigation requirements are complied with if there are any issues. Now, in general, these reports must include changes to the development plan, information on a master plan, lands purchase, and permitting, and a summary of each DO condition and whether or not it was fulfilled. Forms for biannual reports for those who need them or need to see them are available through Department of Economic Opportunities website. And actually, I forgot to say something on the last slide, and we'll talk about this really quick. As biannual reports are required by law to be submitted and are included in DO development order agreements to be submitted, there can be instances in which they are not submitted in time. Failure to submit a biannual report can result in a temporary suspension of the development order by the local government. And so developers need to keep up, as well as reviewers such may need to keep up with timelines with developments of regional impact, ensure that these biannual reports are submitted on a timely fashion. Now, these reports may not always have to be very detailed and contain all the information that I have listed on this slide. If no additional development pursuant to the development order has occurred since the submission of the previous biannual report, then a letter from the developer stating that no development has occurred shall satisfy the requirement for the report. Now, moving on to transportation monitoring studies. These are studies that are required underneath Rules 73C-40, .045, paren 4, and 5 of the Florida Administrative Code. These are included frequently in development order agreements. These studies should typically include data analysis for verifying internal capture rates, background growth rates, and other assumptions made during the application for development approval. Transportation monitoring studies usually require the applicant to do additional things beyond what you might see in the bio report, and that's our difference between the two. So they're typically not replicating the same information. This is going to be something separate. And next, briefly, I want to talk about transportation monitoring and modeling studies. These studies can be done to satisfy the requirement for a transportation monitoring study. This was developed in 2000 by the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. They are not a required component of the DRI review process. I would like to point that out. Now, in terms of where these studies have been conducted, in 2005, an monitoring and modeling study was conducted in Celebration. And monitoring included determining internal capture, peak hour trips, and daily trips, and then was used to compare against ITE trip generation rates. Oh, do we have a
Janine,
question?
this is
Yes.
Jerry. I just wanted to point out for those of you that are not familiar with the monitoring studies that have been done around the state, and excuse me if you already know this, and I know a bunch of you already know this, the monitoring reports come out because of differences in what the developers' traffic numbers are and what the reviewers' traffic numbers believe. And sometimes the only way to move forward with the project is to say, okay, all right, we're going to stop. We can agree on this, but every 2 years, every 3 years, we're going to get traffic counts, and we're going to see how your projections are doing. And so this is an agreement saying that if it is over a certain amount, then by golly, we're going to go back and look at the way you did your study. And as you can see here, this was Celebration, Florida, which is it was pretty advanced for its time as a neo-traditional community, and it's near Disney. And I am sure the argument came out that we think this new neo-traditional community will produce less trips than others, and that's how this got started, and I would assume that's how most transportation monitoring got started. It's when there's differences and no agreement on the traffic numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Now what I would like to do is just give you some overall tips for reviewers who are reviewing approved DRIs. Overall, there's a lot going on with a DRI, even an already approved DRI. There are mountains of assessments and reports to overcome, and there are time frames which must be kept. Especially if an approved DRI has to redo the process or a portion of the process thanks to a substantial deviation finding from an NOPC, it may take 1 or 2 years to get an amended DO. Understanding this, reviewers should consider tips when going through the reviews associated with approved DRIs, such as resolve minor problems by phone. Please do this if you can, so those minor problems do not become volcanoes which erupt later on in the process. Support local agencies in their attempts to achieve or maintain local and collector road connectivity. This can provide benefits later on to the state road system by reducing the number of trips that are taken on highways. And also work with other reviewing agencies in regards to including and strengthening multimodal considerations.
Again, this is Gary Sokolow, and I just want to point out that the city of Destin years ago created a good connectivity behind US 98 and was able to claim sufficient number of trips to allow more development. And as an access management person, I can't stress more that connectivity and permeable networks behind the state road system can really help alleviate some of the problems on it, and also provide a much better environment for walking longer distances. That's it.
Thank you, Gary. And that actually moves me into this next slide in terms of multimodal considerations and Regional Planning Council participation. In regards to multimodal considerations, for the FDOT reviewer, the National Center for Transit Research has developed guidelines and performance measures to incorporate transit and other multimodal considerations into the FDOT DRI review process. This guidance includes specific multimodal information to be included in an ADA, the application for development approval. Multimodal information should be submitted during the transportation methodology meeting. Mode split analysis, sufficiency checklist, evaluation criteria, mitigation strategies, and monitoring help. Regardless of the stage of DRI review, the FDOT reviewer should work with the local government and other reviewing agency staff and applicants to identify opportunities to integrate transit and multimodal services and create strategies for making communities ready for transit in the future. On this slide you see before you, you'll see a link to that guidance. In regards to coordination, in addition, the Regional Planning Councils are there to help you. They're very invested in this process. Don't ever forget to coordinate with these guys as necessary if you have questions or you have something that might come up that might help them understanding issues going on with their DRIs. Now we're going to move into the portion of the webinar that I imagine many of you were waiting for, because I can only imagine how much confusion those three little sentences that were adopted in Section 380.06 has caused. So we have some new review procedures for new DRIs, or basically developments that would qualify as a DRI. The change has been a long time coming for the DRI program since the recommendation to end the DRI program in 1992 by the Environmental Land Management Study Committee. As we already mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, Senate Bill 1216 passed during this past legislative regular session has become effective as of May 14, 2015. This revised portions of Chapter 163, Part 2, and Section 380.06 of the Florida statutes to designate that new proposed development, otherwise subject to the review requirements of Section 380.06, shall be approved by a local government through the comprehensive planning process in lieu of proceeding through the DRI program. So let's give you a big picture of what happened. New developments that would qualify as DRIs that would normally be governed through the DRI program as established in Section 380.06 Florida statutes are now going through the state coordinated review process under Section 163, 3184 of the Florida statutes. If you were in attendance in our last webinar regarding Chapter 3, we went over the comprehensive plan review processes. As a quick refresher, there are two review processes: expedited and state coordinated review. Of the two, the state coordinated review process is the most reminiscent of the original comprehensive plan amendment review process that was in practice prior to major growth management law changes in 2011. The intent of this review process are for those amendments that would cause regional and/or statewide impacts to significant facilities, resources, and infrastructure. For example, sector plans I mentioned earlier as an alternative to DRI process must also go through the state coordinated review process for approval. So understanding this, originally when a DRI was approved prior to the passage of Senate Bill 1216, it was done so by development order, in which it may have accompanying comprehensive plan amendments that were also approved allowed the development to occur. Now, new developments that would qualify as DRIs are approved as comprehensive plan amendments. So the impacts of Senate Bill 1216 on the DRI program, well, you may be asking yourself, are the following still necessary? Binding letters, ADA, substantial deviation findings, NOPCs, abandonments? That does not apply to this new way of looking at these developments. And something that you must understand as you're moving forward, these are going through the comprehensive planning process now and are not going through the DRI program. And so continuing with this refresher on what's going on with the state coordinated review process, you can look on the slide before you to see how this process works. First, you have the development of a proposed comprehensive plan amendment. And after a local proposed amendment transmittal hearing, there's a 60-day state review of the proposed amendment. That includes for FDOT reviewers a 30-day review period in which they have to review the amendment and then submit their comments to Department of Economic Opportunity to be included with the issuance of the objections, recommendations, and comments or ORC report in regards to the amendment. Now, if everything's hunky-dory with this amendment, it will go forward to adoption hearing in the local government. And this has to be done within 180 days of the receipt of the ORC report. If not, if you recall from the last webinar, the amendment will be considered withdrawn unless there is an agreement with the Department of Economic Opportunity to extend the time frame to do the adopted ordinance. Now, after the comprehensive plan amendment is adopted, there is a 45-day state review period of the adopted amendment and ordinance. During that 45-day period, there's a determination of compliance, whether or not the amendment is found to be or not to be in compliance. Now, understanding this, I would like to go through things you may want to focus on during your review of developments that qualifies as DRIs during the state coordinated review process. Please remember that these amendments will be reviewed for consistency with state laws, particularly sections 163-3177 and 163-3180 of the Florida statutes, which speak to the comprehensive plans, data analysis, requirements for land uses and infrastructure, and transportation concurrency if your local government still has it. Now, in regards to data analysis, the amendment must have data analysis that is relevant to the development, including identifying any transportation deficiencies and needs. That includes impacts to transportation resources and facilities of state importance. Now, if you were in attendance in the last webinar, we discussed that underneath FDOT procedure number 525-010-101-D, such facilities are identified to be on the Strategic Intermodal System or SIS, the Statewide Highway System or SHS, or the National Highway System NHS. During the review of these comprehensive plan amendments, new developments must be consistent with the local comprehensive plan and several elements within that comprehensive plan, including the future land use element, the transportation element, the capital improvements element, including its 5-year capital improvements program schedule. and the intergovernmental coordination element. Now, in the past, as well as in the handbook, we don't talk about the intergovernmental coordination element very much. Well, now it's a bit more important with the changes to the DRI program. I'm bringing this up as since there are developments which can cause regional or statewide impacts to resources. So the amendment should have mechanisms which address extrajurisdictional impacts caused by these large developments. In addition, when the DRI program was originally recommended to be eliminated, the intent was to charge the dealing of these large amendments within the intergovernmental coordination element within local government comprehensive plans. So right now, with changes to law, changes to the intergovernmental coordination element within amendments regarding developments that qualify as DRIs is very important to look for during your review. So, with the Comprehensive Plan Amendment, if it's not already existing within the Local Government Comprehensive Plan, there should be new or revised intergovernmental coordination goals, objectives, and policies to ensure coordination between FDOT and other applicable agencies, such as regional planning councils, local governments, transit agencies, and transportation authorities, are there to address extrajurisdictional impacts on transportation facilities as well as any mitigation strategies. In addition, for those local governments with transportation concurrency, it is required underneath Section 163-3180 of the Florida statutes that there must be coordination between local governments and FDOT when proposed plan amendments affect facilities on the SIS. Next, I want to talk about consistency with other plans. Comprehensive plan amendments dealing with developments qualifying as DRIs as well as any other development must be consistent with their applicable MPO, transportation, and FDOT plans, including but not limited to the FDOT work program, long-range transportation plans, the Florida Transportation Plan, cost-feasible plans, and SIS adopted plans. And to go back to what I was talking about earlier with the 3 tips that I mentioned, including coordination, ensuring connectivity with local road system, and multimodal considerations, those tips would also apply when you're reviewing these comprehensive plan amendments. And I hope you keep those in mind while you're reviewing these things. Now, DRI checklists. There are several checklists that are available to you as a help when you're reviewing for approved DRIs. They're at the back of the Chapter 4 in the handbook. Of significance to you would be checklist number 5 in regards to DRI reporting review, and checklist number 7 that I mentioned earlier for NOPCs. I'd like to point out that for those of you who are reviewing approved DRIs, and you're dealing with an NOPC that has a determination of substantial deviation, there are other checklists in the back of this chapter that might be of help to you if those changes have to go through further DRI review. And with that, do I have any questions before this poll has begun?
I don't see any questions here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask people who are watching just to look at the poll, and I'm going to ask how many of you have currently have an active DRI in the area, but instead of answering the poll this time, I'd like you to do this with a show of hands, raising your hands in your dialog box. All right. Very good. The reason we do ask this is that in so many ways, you know, reading between the lines of all the changes in the developments of regional impact um, procedures, the change in philosophy is that it seems like they have moved a lot of what we wanted done, the state wanted done in developments for regional impact, moved it to the comprehensive plan and intergovernmental coordination with those comprehensive plans. And but even then, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You know, 8 out of 50 who have active DRIs in their area. So there's no poll. Jairo. I was just asking people to raise their hands. So I'll add your name to the hand that goes up there. Now, do you have anything to add to my off-the-cuff comment there, Janine?
In regards to the change in the laws
just the change in philosophy over the time. It's not just what some people would say was the pro-growth, anti regulation, but there is a significant amount of change in philosophy that a lot of this should be handled more in sector planning and comprehensive planning. Unless I'm wrong, it's just something
No, you are correct in that observation. A lot of things are moving in that vein, and one could see it as a simplification of the state review processes for these types of development. It is not to say, and this is me speaking on my own personal opinion, that we're getting the DRI program for because we don't like the intent of it, because we created a sector planning program. I think what's going on is there is a lot of review of previous procedures that we've done in the past, and there's a push not only to simplify things so they're not so onerous, but also to encourage more home rule, to encourage local governments to have more of input, to have more stake in the changes that are going on within their boundaries and outside of their boundaries as well.
Yeah. A lot has happened in the last 20 years in philosophy and growth management, and I guess we're seeing a lot of it here. All right. Well, I do have a poll that I'd like to ask you about, and that is, how many of you have a printed copy of the handbook with you, or the electronic version with you? And the reason I'm asking this, Janine, is that you mentioned a number of sections and showed some screenshots of them in your portion, and I was wondering whether it would help to actually show just how good some of the materials that are already and links that are already in the handbook are. And I'm going to close the poll right now, and I'm going to share it with everybody. And there's 50% of you out there and listen, we're not discouraging you from listening to this to get an idea of what is in the handbook. But if you make me the presenter, I will show you some of the things that Janine was talking about on my copy, as my speakers fall over, and so okay, I'm making myself the presenter, and I'm going to do this. And it doesn't look like you can see my screen right now. But I should be the presenter. Yes, I am the presenter. And Janine, do you see do you see my screen?
Gary, you have to close the poll, I think.
Thank you. I think you may be right.
Can you say that again, Gary? I didn't catch that.
I'm going to show my screen. And
We see it now.
all right. So I'm just coming over here, and Janine had talked to you. You saw this picture here. This is the DRI thresholds, but Janine specifically mentioned the substantial deviation criteria, and you'll notice not only are they listed here, but the Florida statute is listed down the side and linked, so you can go right to it. As I go through here, you can see that there are plenty of links to a lot of detail. The reason I'm doing this is because I know this is a very detailed chapter with a lot of law and a lot of administrative rule. Wouldn't expect you to learn it all just by looking at it once, but I'm just showing you that we do have the material that you can go back to as you need. These are some of the checklists that Janine talked about, again, with actual links to what's necessary: pre-application, methodology meeting, sufficiency, and also I believe Janine mentioned the examples of a multi-modal notice of proposed change. And so in addition to that, I wanted to point out that there's a glossary for all of you that may not know everything that we were giving alphabet soup on, as well as I wanted to point out that at the end of the book, and this will work in your electronic version, of course, much better, we reprinted every link that is in the handbook itself. So there are a lot of good materials in there. And since we're at it here, I just wanted to show you we are, and talk to you that we are looking at doing live training on the Impact Handbook next year, 2016, and some of the things that we're working on as part of the training. Part of it would be to have all the materials on a USB drive, including edited recordings of these webinars. So just wanted to show that off to you also. All right, well, Janine, thank you for letting me show that. I'm going to make you the presenter again. And so you'll have to hit yes and to show your screen.
All right. Thank you, Gary, for all of that and showing everyone the examples. If there's no other questions in regards to the materials that we went over today, as well as any other questions that may have just popped into your head in regards to DRIs or this new process for developments that qualify as DRIs. I'm going to hand this off to Nathan, who's going to end this webinar for you guys. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for that, Janine. This is our second to last session. The next session will be session 7 and will be on mitigation, or chapter 5 of the handbook. And it will be in a month at the same time at 2:30 p.m. on October 29th, and will consist mainly of mitigation strategies that will be possible, or that would be possible for you to use during your site impact analyses. We wanted to leave you with one slide that has links to our training information and other resources. If you have any questions related to any of these resources at FDOT, please do contact us. The best way to contact us is via email. With that, we would like to thank you for attending this webinar. We should be able to send this presentation with all of the links sometime in the next day or so. And like I said, we will also have a recorded version of this within a week or two. And with that, I will end the webinar. Thank you and have a good day.